Hello, friends. Today is my birthday. And you know who else knows that? The invisible algorithms hiding behind my YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter accounts. Millions of families across the country, and really the world, they're just beginning to understand the impact of social media on behavior. So, this phenomenon is examined very dramatically in the Netflix movie The Social Dilemma. The Social Dilemma was released in early 2020, and everyone I know was talking about it. Well, all the parents were talking about forcing their kids to watch it. And that's why yours truly had to watch it over winter break. The basic premise of the film is right up there in the subtitle, right? The technology that connects us, also controls us. That society faces dangerous consequences from unregulated exposure to social media. Okay, so the movie is a docudrama, so that means it features dramatized scenarios and a lot of interviews with different professionals from social media companies like Pinterest, Google, Facebook, and so on. So they really cover two main areas of algorithmic scrutiny. So first, as it relates to a consumer's privacy rights, and then second, as it relates to subverting a user's agency or free will, and artificially influencing consumer behavior. So this presentation will focus on really the second area that's in red, so agency, and by extension, behavior. So specifically, this presentation is going to focus on how engineers at platforms like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, etc., how they design and deploy sophisticated algorithms to maintain user engagement. Right? And they do this by predicting and manipulating the social media behaviors of their consumers. But why do companies go to such great lengths to know everything about their users? Well, there's this very famous and now also kind of cliche quote that's used in the film. If you're not paying for the product, then you are the product. So really with social media, this means ads, right? So ad revenue and profits. So if we look at this process loop, we can see that once the consumer registers an account, the data harvesting and selling process begins between social media platforms, advertisers, and information brokers. These platforms are free to users, so the only way they can generate revenue is by serving personalized ads to users. So now, let's look at how software engineers, data scientists, and other professionals work together to develop and train predictive models. So the documentary lays out how companies execute a form of social profiling based off a bunch of interactions by users while they're online. So these interactions include likes and comments on posts, which videos, posts, images are watched and for how long, which ads are clicked, which media files are saved, which pages and groups are followed. And then in addition to these, algorithms actually use geolocation. So they basically find users that are near each other at the same time, and then they prioritize posts for each other. So, for example, users who follow each other and happen to be at the mall at the same time will see each other's posts about shopping first on the newsfeed. So the algorithm uses these types of interactions and geolocation data to determine the priority and sequence of a user's feed. So in what order will the user see posts pop up? But this last point on my slide, a consumer social network, is in my opinion the most invasive profiling that these platforms conduct. They don't just track the consumer's data. They create a predictive profile based off a consumer's network of friends and followers. Last year, a couple of mathematicians performed a study that found, and I quote, 95% of the potential predictive accuracy that a machine learning algorithm might achieve is obtainable just from friends' data. And that's from Mitchell and Bagro. So that's really astounding. So why do I have a strange looking brain picture here? Well, neurobiologists have found that the way social media companies tap into the reward center of the brain, they do it using pings and notifications. So those release dopamine into the user's brain, and the fear of missing out and this need to feel continuously rewarded, it creates a feedback loop that discourages inactivity and encourages users to stay on. And that's also the same principle on how addictive drugs work, actually. So if we look at this slide together with the previous slide on tracked interactions, we get a pretty good picture of how our brain pathways are manipulated. These algorithms are like puppet masters that use pattern recognition to figure out what to show us, when to show us, and in what order to show us. And remember, the twin goals of the algorithms are to create both frequency and duration. So according to the documentary, all of this tracking and manipulation comes at a cost to society. Right, so the documentary primarily deals with how social media is linked to depression, anxiety, and withdrawal, especially in adolescence. To quote Tristan Harris, who is a former design ethicist at Google, "We're training and conditioning a whole new generation of people that, when we are uncomfortable or lonely or uncertain or afraid, we have a digital pacifier for ourselves that's kind of atrophying our own ability to deal with that." So, if we recall the previous slides, this happens because social media use discourages the natural, and I'd say evolutionary, development of social interactions. Right? So instead, our brain pathways are being artificially and frequently manipulated. And in adolescence, this has a more profound effect because the prefrontal cortex is still developing, and therefore, really, there's no sense of impulse control. So the second cost, which the documentary didn't cover, but I think it's important to mention, especially in light of recent events in the US, and that's increased radicalization and antisocial behavior linked to social media platforms. So the algorithm will show users or recommend users more of the types of posts that they've already clicked on and more of what their social network clicks on. So in the most recent example of this, white supremacists and conspiracy peddlers use these platforms to recruit and organize the January 6th insurrection against the US Capitol. This insurrection finally forced companies like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube to crack down on these hate groups. A main issue with the documentary is that it fails to offer multiple perspectives. In other words, the documentary offers no experts with counter-arguments. It offers a very, I would say, binary view, where social media companies are like Machiavellian puppet masters, and consumers are clueless pawns with no free will. And that's a pretty simplistic model. And second, while it is critical that consumers are aware of how social media algorithms are designed to manipulate behaviors, there are benefits to social media that were not examined. These benefits have completely transformed human connection, right? They allow people to connect with each other across the globe, whether it's to make friends, collaborate on ideas, or pursue shared interests. And social media has become a very important tool for my generation, right? We crowdsource innovation as well as amplify issues that are important to us, from climate change to social justice. So to wrap up, to have agency, consumers must have awareness on how social media algorithms work, and to know that consumer information is being monetized for the purpose of generating ad revenue. But it's unfair to put the burden entirely on consumers. After all, these are massive companies whose entire business model relies on driving our behavior, right? They're not going to go out without a fight. So consumers face an asymmetric information and therefore a power imbalance. Therefore, I think that future engineers, innovators, we have a moral imperative to demand a new kind of society. Our products and platforms must consciously weigh societal harm. Right? In economics, we learned about this concept called negative externalities, right? Companies that fail to mitigate the adverse societal effects of their products, of course, after these adverse effects become known, they should be required to contribute to the cost of cleaning up their mess. So thank you for staying with me throughout this entire presentation. I know it was pretty long. If you're interested in some of the research provided, here's a short list of references. Of course, I look forward to your questions and feedback.